Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rem and Sam podcast. We'll try to do our best to make it through this one, but it's storming pretty good out there right now. So, worst case scenario, we have scrolls set off to the side. If the score gets really bad, if things are going to go super south, we'll scribble down some thoughts on some scrolls, and IT is going to seal them up, and we'll just go ahead and save them for the next generation. Those will be the real lost tapes of the Rem and Sam pod. There was a little lightning, so we took some precautions just in case, but it doesn't look like it's going to get too bad. But like I said, we're going to hurry up and try to make it through this one. And we're also going to hurry up because the Fever are playing the Aces in a little bit. There's not a lot going on in the sports world right now on a Tuesday night. You know we're degenerates right now because in the background we've got a rerun of the in-season tournament championship game from this past year. I don't even know if you guys remember who was in the in-season tournament finals from this past season. It was the Lakers, obviously. Then they hung the banner to remind everybody, so we won't forget that they took home the 2024 in-season tournament trophy versus the Pacers, which obviously I think everybody knows that, but it's not the first thing you think of when you think of the 2024 NBA regular season is the in-season tournament. And just kind of the whole thing in general. But, and again, in the moment, it was fun. I think we were having a good time watching it. But honestly, now, going back and remembering that this happened, it is kind of a crazy, not historic season, but just like a crazy bunch of stories and weird things that have happened to the Lakers this year. A bunch of weird boxes they checked. And I guess I don't know if this offseason still technically counts for this season with the in-season tournament in it. But you think they have this year where they win the first ever in-season tournament. They hang a banner for it. LeBron, was there like an MVP for that? Was there an MVP even named after one of the legends? Did he take home another MVP trophy for the in-season tournament? And then they draft his son and hire a former ESPN analyst, also a former player as well too. But it's probably like 80-20 player analyst, because the analyst part is just a reflection of his ability to communicate. I think a lot of people that are good coaches also, I guess, maybe because being on TV and then explaining is also two different skills as well, too, not to get sidetracked. But again, winning a banner that's not the actual finals, hiring a ESPN analyst who might actually be a good hire, and then drafting LeBron's son. But again, also drafting LeBron son with a pick that's kind of like, okay, I think everybody at least sees what was going on there. like we said, we're very pro Bronny on this pod, but I'm just, for the ones that might not be, I think even with the 55th pick, it's at least somewhat of an understandable basketball move. But just a bunch of weird events, a weird sounding events. If you told a Lakers fan that that's how their season was going to play out the next, I guess not season, but the next 12 months or whatever, then I don't know how they would feel about it. Probably pretty split. I think the Lakers are all still trying to win the championship. But hey, they're one step closer with winning this in-season tournament finals. So, and the crazy courts as well, too. I've forgotten about the crazy colored courts, but and the fact that they had gone with the blue and the red combo for the actual final game, which I forgot were they just doing that anyways because that's kind of the league's colors, or was it neutral to the two teams? I guess the Pacers had blue, but they were wearing their white jerseys in the finals. And, it did, the Pacers ended up making a conference finals run as well, too. I think that was a little bit sneaky. So maybe there was some signs showed in the in-season tournament. I mean, it'll just have to be one of those things that, we're going to have to get a little bit of history to see how that stuff plays out. I mean, there's not going to be as much pressure on LeBron either to win this next one. I don't know if there's pressure on anybody to win the in-season tournament, but I mean, in the moment, it was cool anyways. I don't know if we have to call it like a legacy thing or start doing arguments, but it's still a tournament to win against a bunch of other NBA guys. I mean, it's still cool to do. So, and the fact that in a one-off situation, it was still LeBron out of all the guys that came out on top, was still like a pretty awesome thing to have happen. So next year, who's going to be the first non-LeBron guy to win it? Is LeBron going to go back to back in-season tournament. Are we going to have in-season tournament storylines for the next season? I mean, we're doing in-season tournament storylines in the summer. Is this the official low point of summer basketball that we're doing? We're previewing in-season tournament storylines for the upcoming NBA season. Who knows? And it's not even that much of a dead point. Like, there is still news going on in the NBA. I mean, free agency just started. There is still a lot of stuff going on, but not a lot of stuff to watch. I guess you can watch, the analysis of everything. And did they do like a free agency special for NBA Today or Countdown or something like that on ESPN? I didn't see. I guess we didn't have that one up on the TVs at work, but they do need to find a way to make free agency a little bit more entertaining. I know people online have proposed, and I think they've done this more with the NFL, but probably the NBA as well too, where you don't announce any of the moves or any of the trades in the off season, and then in the regular season, first game, everybody shows up and you're like, oh, this guy's on that team. He came onto the total for that team. I did not see that coming at all. Like, I guess I'm going to blank now on whatever the big off-season acquisition was for last season. But, just some crazy move goes down. Like, if one of the Cavs guys gets traded this summer, which, who knows how likely that looks as well, too, with the Mitchell contract just going down. And then some weird Windhorse news about Garland that was reported as well. I don't know if that was today or earlier this week, but I guess that kind of goes complete opposite, not announcing it, because then there's absolutely zero NBA stuff going on at this point in the season. But do they need to do I don't even know how, like a free agency Shark Tank, do the free agents have to go into a room and pitch themselves to the owner? I guess that wouldn't be every free agent. Like, is Paul George, does he go into a room and pitch himself to the Clippers and the Sixers? I guess the Clippers probably needed to pitch themselves more to the players. Would that have been the twist if the show had started in the 90s and then in the 2000s after LeBron's decision, I guess in the 2010s, then the show flips from where it was the players pitching to the owners to where the owners pitching the players? Maybe it goes both ways depending on the guy. You get a couple of role guys. Again, it honestly does feel like, even I guess he's still picking from the teams with cap space that can afford him, obviously, but I guess obviously he has control over where he's going to go. It goes both ways. But the Klay Thompson decision, I guess it really is teams courting the players. So it'd be the other way around. It'd be the owners or the GMs or whoever doing the individual pitches to the players. Would it be a one-on-one Shark Tank show? Maybe you get all of the you have to line up all the Clippers candidates. We'll workshop the show with IT and figure out how it works. But you get Klay Thompson, the Mavericks, the Lakers, and the Warriors all in a room in front of Klay Thompson. I guess it is reverse Shark Tank. We're gonna keep workshopping it. It is reverse Shark Tank like that. So you've got one player in multiple pitches versus Shark Tank, obviously one pitch, and then he's pitching to multiple investors. Again, they need to make a way to make free agency more entertaining, because there's nothing for me to throw on in the background of the day or the night besides I guess first take in the morning's obviously solid, but after free agency, Stephen A is going to dip out, so they're going to need to come up with a show. And if they listen to the show, I mean, this show, at least we're throwing out ideas. But would it be Mark Cuban, Mike Dunleavy, and Rob Pelinka all trying to convince Klay Thompson to play for their team? Klay Thompson just immediately, Dunleavy's just kicked out of the room, and it's down to Pelinka and Cuban. I guess Nico Harrison as well too for the Mavs. Was there a third team, or was the third team that I'm thinking about the Warriors? I can't remember if the Warriors, if it was three teams or three teams, not the Warriors, but definitely the Warriors, Lakers, and Mavs were interested, which was a weird, I guess not a weird thing with the Klay Thompson, maybe a weird thing, but part of the storylines with his free agency, which was a lot of the questions that me and Sam had brought up on in the past, were, do the Warriors want to make the effort to bring Klay Thompson back versus, does Klay Thompson want to return to the team? I guess we always kind of assume, I have to go back and remember now, but like I feel like we always kind of assume that, yeah, I mean, Klay would want to return to the team if the Warriors would want to make it work. And, the part that I guess I was saying, just a second ago that was a little bit surprising is that it seemed like from Klay's end, he was the one that didn't want to make it work. I guess I don't remember what the exact number that the Warriors offered him was, but I feel like it was pretty similar to what he ended up getting from the Mavs. And, from the Lakers as well, too, he took definitely a lesser number from the Mavs to go join the Lakers. And I think a less year as well, too. So gave up on a little bit of security. So, I mean, in theory, anyways, he was willing to give up more money to choose a location that he wanted to play with more. But, the Warriors, and there was things about the Warriors that definitely made Klay Thompson upset, but I don't know if they were related to Klay. I guess they were related to Klay exactly because it was regarding the contract negotiations with him. And then by extension, he was upset that some of the other guys had gotten deals and gotten, numbers that, they're all guys that, especially after you win the title, you feel like you have to pay guys, but guys that were all on the end of they were definitely getting paid on the higher end, I think, of their skill sets. And the fact that the Warriors were doing that so easily, and then the Klay thing was going to, eventually approach, and they were going to get to that discussion, and he was going to feel like, hey, they're not giving me the same benefit of doubt as they're giving these other players. Like, that is a direct effect to Klay Thompson for sure. But I mean, in terms of the dollar amount the Warriors were willing to commit to him, it was going to be similar, if I remember the reports correctly, to what he was going to be getting from these other teams. So the fact that there was fractures between the Warriors and in Klay, especially after the whole, just constant drama with Draymond, and especially this last season where it felt like everything that the Draymond drama has had in his entire career led up to the suspension that he served earlier in the year. And it just felt like any friction in the locker room was, was being perceived from the outside looking in, being generated from Draymond. And I think there was some Draymond stuff that definitely affected Klay. But again, there was also friction between Klay and the Warriors front office, at least by the end anyways. So all that being said, in a weird way, well, I guess I should say first, it is sad that Klay Thompson and the Warriors Big Three era is over. Warriors fans are going to be sad that I just skipped right over that to start, because we should take a moment of silence to remember the incredible run that this Big Three had. I mean, right after that, they were the title, right after San Antonio won the title, that revenge title against Miami. So that would have been the last title for that Big Three. You got Kawhi, in theory, trying to train on to, take on the torch at that point. But the Warriors win the title next season, and then they end up taking the torch as the Big Three, the team focus, chemistry. Curry's always gotten the comps to Duncan in terms of vibes as a superstar, but the whole core in general as well too, and that whole culture. Steve Kerr being in having influence from Greg Popovich in his career, having played for the San Antonio Spurs. Just it felt like a natural extent, in a way. And they kind of carried the belt of that Spurs organization. So, I know definitely a lot of storylines are going to be brought up as well, too, about will we see this going forward in terms of teams sticking together this long? And it's totally fair. And I guess in a way, we are seeing it happen right now with the Boston Celtics. That duo has been together now for, what was this, their seventh season? I guess 7 seasons together, but Brown's been in the league for 8 years. He's in the league a year before Tatum. So, I mean, that core is a couple years away from having a decade-long run together. But again, those guys come into the league a little bit younger now. Just in general, everybody comes into the league a little bit younger, one and dones. Duncan, and Duncan, I think was like a two and done as well. So it wasn't like a major thing for Duncan. But guys are, at 10 years and just a little bit, they can play a little bit longer as well too. So the 10-year mark maybe isn't as far along in a career as it would have been in the past. And again, just in the modern day, you don't really know long term what is going to be the history between, or just the relationship between any player and any team. And as good as it seems between Tatum and Brown and Boston right now, because it's not just that they won the title together, it's that, and you do have to have good vibes to win the title, make no mistake. I guess that has to happen. But there was definitely, maybe it was the weight off the shoulders as well, too. I'm sure that was a big part of it. But there was definitely just a really good vibe and a good chemistry between everybody and those two guys in that locker room. And I was going to say it was at the all-time high, but again, this is on the tails of them winning the title. So I guess as I'm saying this all makes sense. But, again, you just never know what these guys' history in the league is going to be. So as confident as that duo looks and as strong as that core looks right now, you just never know. And I guess, Denver is on the verge of making their run. But again, that's kind of a duo as well, too. It's more of a Murray Jokic duo, and you got kind of this combo three with Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. It kind of depends on the day. And you kind of end up with a top four. Really, as we've seen now, you need the starting five to have just a certain level of talent. KCP was the fifth guy on that team for the Celtics, or for the Nuggets, the last couple of years. And I mean, who is even the fifth guy in the Celtics lineup at any given time? I mean, all due respect to our guy Horford, but if you got Porzingis out there on the court and Porzingis is really cooking, I mean, with all due respect, like it might be Derek White at any given time is like the fifth best guy on the court for the Celtics. So we get these lineups are really good, but as strong as those duos look together, we don't really even have a trio like that trio. So I guess those questions are fair about what we see this again. But as good as it is, and as good as it was, I should say, for the Warriors core, and as sad as it is that they are leaving, if there was friction between Klay and the front office, and if there just has been friction in general and just bad vibes in the locker room and something's off and something needed a reset, I hate to be the one to say it. Maybe it's just Sam's not here, and we get, we go rogue when Sam's not here. But maybe there's like a little bit of good reset with Klay Thompson. And I guess I shouldn't say with Klay Thompson leaving, but just the fact that there's going to be a major shakeup in the core could be good for the vibes of the Warriors. And Klay, I think the personality that he is and what he has meant to that team, that organization, the city, all that stuff, that's never going to be replaced. The on the court stuff at the peak, like, you're never going to replace Klay Thompson. But if it's not good at the end, it's not good. So maybe there is a little bit of silver lining with not necessarily running back that piece of the roster. And also, there was a cap thing as well, too, that they opened up a little bit of cap flexibility. And I kind of like some of the moves that they make. I'm scrolling down to pull back up. I guess up until like a couple hours ago, maybe not even a couple hours ago, like an hour ago, they were only at one move. But they went in and got Melton for $12.8 million a year. So let's see. Klay Thompson's contract ended up being... he did take a pay cut. He's at $16 million a year to be on the Mavs. So, only a $4 million a year difference between Melton and Klay Thompson, but it is an extra player. And earlier today, they went out and did a sign and trade with the Timberwolves for Kyle Anderson. And we'll do a live update here of the Woj Twitter. Again, when that trade dropped, the initial news was that it was just a sign and trade, and that Anderson was going from Minnesota to Golden State on a 3-year, $27 million deal, so $9 million a year. obviously, but the rest of the details of the sign and trade weren't out yet. Woj says that Golden State is sending Minnesota a future second round pick swap and cash in a sign and trade to ESPN. Minnesota, a second round pick swap. Is that the first ever? I don't know if I've ever heard of a pick swap in the second round. Is Minnesota even going to remember to use that and cash that in? Woj didn't even say what year it was either. Just a future. They were like, don't even worry about telling us what year it is. It literally does not matter that we swap picks in the second round. They're not gaining a pick. They're going to move up 7 spots in the second round. Here, I'm talking trash about it now, and it's going to be the next Jokic. They're going to move up to 42 and take some international guy, and he's going to pop off. But I guarantee you Minnesota just never calls back. And as long as Golden State just sent that check right away in the Kyle Anderson trade, is JJ Redick the one that got traded for cash and then they ended up using that cash to buy a printer in the office? I don't remember if that guy that got traded for cash was JJ Redick and if he's the one that told that story, but I believe it was the future at the time, the future head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers getting traded for a printer. But I think it did work out pretty good for JJ Redick. But yeah, Minnesota, man, collecting the future assets this offseason. Rob Dillingham, and they get the future second round pick swap in cash for the Kyle Anderson trade. But I guess between the two guys, you're at, 22-ish million for Kyle Anderson and Melton. So if they were going to, be a little more generous than the 16 million that Clay took from the Mavs, and we're end up in like the $18 million a year range, which I honestly, Clay at 16 million a year is not bad. It's a pretty good upside play on Klay Thompson. I don't think you can necessarily complain about that number too much, but if you're going to be a little bit generous for the outstanding career that he had in Golden State, say it's like an $18 million a year contract. Clay at 18 million and kind of reluctant just about the whole situation and, just showing back up in the locker room after bad vibes, just like nothing ever happened. And with that versus Anderson or Melton, again, at like $22-23 million a year it's a close call because I do really, really like Melton. I think he was pretty valuable for that Sixers team. And at $12 million a year, that would probably been a little bit too rich for him at this point, especially after the Paul George trade. And they're going to, they need to add a couple of players as well, too. So they probably weren't looking to commit too much to DeAnthony Melton after that. But, like we talked about with Sam as well, too, on the Friday pod, another reason that the Warriors anyways, are at least, more okay with Klay Thompson moving on is the fact that they have Podziemski in the backcourt as well, too. So honestly, I forget again with Sam a couple of weeks ago, he was saying that the Warriors might be a sleeper play for kind of like a sneaky, like bottom 3, bottom 4 type team. Maybe bottom 3 is a little aggressive, but like bottom 4, just like a miss the playoff team again, totally for the West, but definitely be on the lower side. But the roster now, again, you got Steph and Draymond still as the main pieces. And maybe, I guess no Klay is not going to mean like Draymond's not going to act different. Wouldn't be my bet, but it wouldn't be a Klay move leaving. And maybe it would be an accumulation of all the other stuff and just sort of the urgency you get when you're kind of staring down the end of your career. And maybe he just kind of feels like, okay, now it's like, I really have to try to do these extra things to try to really lock in here and maximize these last years to try to win the title. But, maybe just, again, subtracting bad vibes at one spot, maybe I don't know the vibes map that this works. I don't know Terrence Howard and Wines. I don't know if they're going to put me on the Rogan pod to debate this vibes map, but if you subtract bad vibes from one area, does it add good vibes to another area, and maybe Draymond Green's got like a little bit of a pep in his step again. But, Steph and Draymond as your two main guys, and then Wiggins, Podziemski, the rookie, Melton and Anderson in your rotation. You still have Gary Payton, Looney, Trace Jackson Davis for your bigs. So maybe if they're able to add one more guy, let's see if they have another exception here. I believe they have the biannual exception available to them, which is about $4 million, $5 million. I could be wrong, but I don't know. I don't know what off the top, what center they could add for that price range, but maybe another front court type player to fill it out. Kuminga, just to say his name out so the people don't get mad that I didn't mention it. But again, yeah, maybe this is just me as well too, projecting the young guys kind of taking another step up. But it's kind of a fun lineup. And if Podziemski is better, which I would assume he is, it's going to be, we were saying he's already better than Klay Thompson last year. And then Kuminga, if the flashes that he showed become really much more consistent, then just, any kind of that much reliability out of a $7 million a year player would be, much welcome for this Warriors team. So I'm not as totally set on being pessimistic about the Warriors as I was a couple of weeks ago. I'll put it that way anyways. I don't know if that's a super encouraging outlook for Warriors fans if they're in that kind of relatable place, but I will say I am not opposed to being optimistic about the Warriors next season. What did I say earlier? I'm not set on being pessimistic. I know I'm just saying the same thing the other way around, but I think because I guess I'm not, again, it's not really set on optimism or not focused on optimism. I can't even remember my own sayings correctly, but I'm not set on being pessimistic against the Warriors next season is where I stand after them losing Klay Thompson. And again, Klay Thompson for $16 million a year for the Mavs is a pretty nice bet. And of course, after he signed with the Mavs, we get the ESPN graphic with the Mavs where it's the starting five lineup: Kyrie, Klay, Luka, PJ Washington, and Derek Lively. And, it's like 6 fire emojis in the caption. Who's stopping this lineup? It's like, okay, add a $16 million, any $16 million a year player to the number 5 seed in the West. I don't know if it's 6. I don't know if we need the 6 fire emoji on that. That might be a Rosillo type joke. My bad. But I don't know if we need to get that aggressive, but it is a nice bet. For some reason in my mind, I like the dynamic of him and PJ Washington together because I really did like PJ Washington's defense, and I think Sam did as well too. And there were times where I think everybody on the Mavs could have played a little bit better defense, but when PJ Washington was locked in, he was definitely playing pretty nice. And the part for him and the rest of the Mavs was the consistency shooting, and for Klay as well too. That has been a problem. I get it, but especially in the playoffs, I was going back and pulling those playoff numbers back up from this past season, and it was like, oh, maybe the $16 million a year is too much, but. Again, post All-Star break, he was over 40%. I think, to have that much of a chunk of the season is not, to me, it says that he's still capable of, some type of sustain. He's at least capable of having a good post All-Star game run next year. And if you're the Mavs, like you proved this year, getting hot in the back half of the season is, what's more important. I don't know if we need to pause that or not, but getting hot in the back half of the season is what is important for the Mavs. So, if he can take away some of that shooting responsibility from PJ Washington, he'll at least put the shots up. I kind of like that as well too. And him on the Warriors, it's Kerr. They're still kind of hoping that he does the same type of thing. So you're running him off of screens in the same way, and the pin downs, and he's never really a ball handler, but some of those like 1 or 2 dribble pull-ups where, again, in theory, if he's just if he's just in the Derek Jones Jr. spot in the corner next year, just shooting corner threes, and Luka, all the space that Luka and Kyrie are going to generate for him, I get that Steph is going to generate, as much space on the court for any other player possible. But it is it's a different type of gravity with Luka Doncic, where it's that top of the key, that pick and roll every time, and just that's little bit of a slower pace. Again, the way the Warriors are using Steph's gravity, where maybe he is off the ball, and you're running shooters around that. It's maybe that dynamic is able to favor Clay a little bit more. And again, maybe it elevates PJ Washington if he just kind of is able to limit his role a little bit. I think we all, at least from an upside standpoint, like the bet of upgrading him versus Derek Jones. And again, at $16 million a year, for him taking, if anybody takes a reasonable price, obviously it's going to work out. But, even next year, that was a $16 million a year average. Next year, he's $15.8 million. Still the third highest paid guy on the team. But PJ Washington's at 15.5. I'm not saying PJ Washington's actually, PJ Washington, shout out, get your bag. I'm not saying you don't deserve it, but if PJ Washington is a $15 million a year player, I mean, PJ Washington and Clay are like this, at least the same level of player, and at least have, one or two skills that I think could be maximized around a ball dominant guy like Luka Doncic. And, maybe just the Mavs having better bigs as well, too, with Gafford and Lively. Maybe the way that kind of impacts the way people are focusing, dipping in on the lane and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it helps. But I do like the fit. The fit with him in LA, it is fun. I get it. If Luka and Steph, they're going to make it like playing with LeBron, he's going to get some open looks for three. It's not going to hurt him. But if you go in there, I mean, talk about 6 fire emojis for Clay on the Mavs. Like, we're going to get, I don't even know if the Instagram caption limit can contain the amount of fire emojis that ESPN would want to put out for that. I mean, the amount of big three graphics that just the Clay jersey edits, Clay, LeBron, Anthony Davis. I get big four. Do we throw Bronny in on the graphic when if they sign Klay Thompson to the Lakers? Is it LeBron and his son and Davis and Clay just all together on the ESPN post? I don't know, but the expectations for Klay Thompson going to the Lakers, to me, I think would have been a little bit too much. At that point, you're like, Clay's your third star. Austin Reeves, you're like, man, this line of Austin Reeves, Klay Thompson, got LeBron, Davis, and Bronny. I mean, that's a starting five that can win in the playoffs right there. Maybe the Bronny, maybe we change out the Bronny minutes based on the matchup. Who knows? But, again, the expectations for Klay to me in LA versus the vibes in him in Dallas, that feels a little bit more manageable. In Dallas as well, too. I don't think anybody is expecting more from LA than they are from Dallas next year. I would say the expectations for those teams, for the Lakers, might be at best equal to the Mavericks. But I don't think just because the Mavs made the title last year, they're going to go right back on the list of A-plus title like odds contender type teams. I don't know if they're right back in that A-plus tier. I'm gonna pull up the odds right now to see if they're like a single digit or low double digit odds teams. I guess the six, I haven't looked at them since the Sixers trade. The Sixers would be in that mix as well too. Now we know the Knicks were like 8-1 after the Bridges trade. They're 9-1 now. The Sixers have taken that 8-1 spot plus 850. So yeah, the Mavs are like right on top of tier 2. And the other sportsbooks, shout out DRF Sportsbook, but some of the other sportsbooks out there, shout out to BETSTAMP, that can let you shop the odds and look at all the sportsbooks, compare all the odds at one time. But they got Minnesota at 10-1. So again, I don't know if just because you got single digit odds, it means you're in tier 1. That would be Celtics, Thunder, Nuggets, Sixers, Knicks. But I don't know, the Knicks at 9-1 in Minnesota at 10-1. I guess, the market, the New York market, obviously would be the main reason for that. But just from a talent standpoint, I don't know if those teams are too far a tier off. And then the Mavericks, Dallas would be at 11-1. And they're right in front of Milwaukee, the Lakers, which is a big drop off. Milwaukee at 15-1. And it drops off Lakers at 34-1. and then Phoenix, and then Golden State as well, too. So they've got Golden State kind of right on top of all these bad teams. Golden State over Memphis for NBA championship winner odds. As set on not being pessimistic as I am about the Warriors, I don't know if I would project them over Memphis or New Orleans or Miami or Orlando. The Warriors at 35-1 versus the Magic at 50-1. That seems a little insane. I mean, I'm not saying that the Warriors have a better, or the Rockets have a better title shot than the Warriors, but what's a better bet? The Warriors at 35-1 or the Rockets at 121? The Spurs at 150-1 with Wemby? Or the Warriors at 35-1? Which one would you rather put your hard-earned dollar on? You're probably screaming, yeah, probably the Warriors, the much better team. But I think at 35-1, we say the Warriors probably not going to win the title next year anyways. Maybe be a competitive playoff team again. Again, I'm not against saying it, but win the title would be a little bit aggressive. But again, for Dallas, kind of right in that tier 2 of teams, which I think is fair. And I think the expectations of bringing Klay Thompson in, I think the fire emoji caption is enough hype for Klay Thompson. I don't think we need actual, because I mean, again, it's just the first take. Does Stephen A have to cut vacation? Does he have to to postpone vacation for a day because Klay Thompson went to the Lakers, and now we have to do are the Lakers the second best team in the West now? Is it the Nuggets, the Lakers? Are the Lakers better than the Thunder? Do we have to do all the storylines now that Klay Thompson's there? But thankfully, the Mavs, I think everybody can kind of contain themselves. And then they also did lose Josh Green in this deal, which maybe is a sneaky reason not to like it as well too, because Josh Green, especially the age, it's a little, I don't know if panicky is the right word. It is a little panicky to try to give up Josh Green for Klay Thompson. I get the Warriors as well too are trying to negotiate something that gets you that deal. And I guess the Mavs probably with their salary cap situation probably almost had to do a sign and trade in some way to bring him in. But they end up sending out, or no, the Hornets send 2 second-round picks to the Warriors, and then the Mavs send out Josh Green to the Hornets. So again, Klay to the Mavs, 2 second-round picks from Charlotte to the Warriors, and Josh Green to the Mavericks. So again, just a sad end to a historic trio. Just it's not like you can trade band members if you're the Beatles or whatever, but imagine if the Beatles just traded one of their guys for 2 second-round picks. The adults are going to get mad that I didn't just name a Beatle right there super casually, but I panicked and didn't want to get a Beatle name wrong. But I'm pretty sure we all know and love Jeff Harrison just as much as the next guy. So I mean, we all know the Beatles well here on the Rem and Sam podcast, obviously. But if you could break up this legendary team for 2 second-round picks, it's not necessarily a storybook ending, but definitely a storybook run for the trio, which, in basketball, it was important. Again, bad breakup, all that. 2 second-round picks, it's still not like a real it is real, but it's not real to consider a 2 second-round picks a bad breakup. But in basketball terms, not necessarily the way you want to see things come to the end. But I think a potentially fun post-run era here for Klay Thompson in Dallas, because that is a thing that we've seen with, superstars I don't want to say at the end of their careers, but, at the end of their run with the group of guys, like at the end of that peak of their powers, their prime years, when they go to that next team, obviously sometimes it can go really, really south. But, every now and then you get, Joe Montana, the Chiefs. It's like, okay, they're feisty. They're in the mix. There's some AFC championship runs in there, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was divisional round. But, there's some playoff wins in there. Bring in Marcus Allen. You have some fun teams. But then sometimes you get the Johnny Unitas on the Chargers. And just people are like, some people heard that and were like, wait a second, Johnny Unitas played on the Chargers? Yeah, sometimes you get the Shaq on the Cavs or whatever, and you just you don't get the fun little secondary thing. I get Brady on the Bucks is obviously ultimate example of that. That doesn't even count. So there is a world, I guess, where it can kind of elevate past that. You get Manning on the Broncos. Those two guys specifically. I'm trying to think of any NBA guys off the top of my head. I don't know if we need to pause that or not, but I just went through my 90s Rolodex of players. It was about 16 players long. I can't think of anybody that had a fun post-run career. But again, I think maybe if there's a fun Klay Thompson shooting performance in there in the playoffs, that's the big thing. If he can get back to that consistency that he had pre-All-Star, post-All-Star break, and just continue it into the playoffs, then maybe we're not even having this discussion about him on the Mavs. But now that he is on the Mavs, that is definitely the most beneficial time for him to show up. But let's see what other moves we wanted to mention quickly. It was kind of and is still kind of a slow free agency. I mean, just in general, not the most stacked free agency class. And like LeBron, technically a free agent, but we knew he wasn't going to go anywhere. So he's kind of off the market. Outside of that, I guess, we're Paul George. So your only all NBA guys that are on the market are Paul George, I guess Harden as well too, but again, another kind of limited market. Paul George was also probably going to go to either the Sixers or go back to the Clippers and then the Warriors. It felt like in that last, week to couple days really started to heat up as a potential option. At least they got really aggressive in trying to make a move and get something done. But, we kind of knew what his destinations were going to be before the free agency window even opened up. So there wasn't really a lot of drama that looked like could happen on paper. And then especially, the last couple of years, because they've done the weird stuff with the windows now. So you get like the negotiating window, but none of these contracts have actually been officially assigned. Like if you pull up the Spotrac page, everything, the only one that's not agreed to and is just official is the Tyrese Maxey extension with the Sixers, which, you could re-sign with your own team under the new CBA, I believe. But Colin Gillespie, it looks like that went official as well, too. Oh, not with his own team, from Denver to Phoenix. Wow, Phoenix able to pull Colin Gillespie away from Denver. That's a big move. And it also looks like the Blazers signed a guy, Justin Minaya? I feel like I've heard that name before. I just can't put a face to Justin Minaya, unfortunately. But, there wasn't a potential for a ton of drama. And then it felt like with the windows, we got a bunch of news, like even before free agency, but then right when the free agency window would open up, it would just be this flurry of news and just this chaos of signings and just this domino effect. And we would just get this snowball avalanche of, is there any more metaphors that I can use? There would just be this, crazy run of moves that we would get for NBA free agency. And then the window opened up and it was like, nothing really happened. There was some extensions. Again, you can negotiate with your own team. There's some extensions beforehand, but nothing too crazy. And then Paul George made it official and decided to leave the Clippers. And for some reason decided to do it at like 3 a.m, which fortunately I was not up or in a position to be woken up by this type of move, which at least now, thankfully for it. I guess if there's an alternate timeline where we're getting to call at 1 a.m. saying, hey, Paul George got traded, that's probably a pretty cool timeline. But anyways, early in the morning, late at night, however you want to put it, Paul George decided to make the move from the Clippers to the Sixers. I guess I don't know if he was trying to do it like Baltimore Colts style or if the meetings just went this long. Maybe it was actually like some real conversations between him and the Clippers and the Sixers, because I don't even know if it was necessarily the Clippers. Maybe it was just him leaving LA. Maybe he needed a couple of more hours to just finally really come to terms with the fact that he was going to be, unfortunately, relocating Podcast P to the city of brotherly love. But once he decided to make the move, I don't know if he was like, just if I go at night, nobody's gonna see. And, and then I'll be on the Sixers and people will be like, wait a second, oh, Paul George's on the Sixers, of course. But I don't know if it's that like that Norm joke about the Polish government. They wanted to, but of course they were like, I think, the sun, very important to our universe. It's important to do science in the sun, of course. And the Polish government wanted to send a crew of men to study the sun, but people were saying they couldn't do that. But I mean, they told everybody they were going at night. So I don't know if Paul George just was like, hey, if I go at night, then nobody's going to see me. But that's what he tried to do with this Sixers move. But, you know, from Morey's perspective, I think this is a really interesting move because I was trying to think of like in one, I get not even just from Morey's perspective, but just in general, this is a really interesting move because I was trying to think for Morey if he had been able to pull off a signing like this, not just a signing of this caliber, but a signing where I think the public conscience is like very, very in favor of it. And he's obviously made moves out of it. I mean, the Harden trade was phenomenal. Everybody loved that. But just in terms of free agency signings, because I was going back and, trying to remind myself of some of the more, higher end talent that he had ended up signing in free agency. And most of it would have been back in those Houston days. But he also tends to get in on these guys at an interesting time in their career. And the one really big, in terms of accolades and resume, player that he was able to get would have been Dwight Howard when he was at Houston. Also, Jeremy Lin, signed Jeremy Lin away from the Knicks, tried to bring in Josh Smith, just brought in a ton of guys like that, just guys at the end of the run. Josh Smith, Brent Berry, Steve Francis. Steve Francis was a early one. Jason Terry, PJ Tucker, but PJ Tucker has just been at the he came into the league and what should have been the end of his career and then somehow managed to have a decade-long career. So shout out to PJ Tucker. But Luke and Mbamute. Carmelo, I forget, did they sign Carmelo or did they trade for Carmelo? But regardless, brought in Carmelo. So, it doesn't necessarily have a super great resume of these free agent signings. But, the Paul George one, I think, one, you have to do it just with what's available on the market, the cap space that you've been able to clear out. And, the type of player that Paul George is as well, too. But, again, he does get in on these guys at an interesting time. So I think it is funny that you get Paul George, and again, a universally loved move to Paul George, but you also get him at 34. And, you get Dwight Howard post Lakers where it was definitely, he was in, maybe he just needs a change of scenery kind of phase. But again, that's post Lakers and post Orlando. And that's kind of two locations where it's like, okay, I think at this point, maybe it's like Dwight Howard. I think we kind of know what's going on with this guy. So I think, Morey is definitely taking a swing on this guy. So maybe that's the thing where it's like, I don't know if this move is necessarily being viewed as a swing like that, but at 34 and with some of the health history and with the money that they're definitely committing to him, it definitely is a little bit of, a swing for sure. But also with Morey has always been the guy that has been like the forward thinking basketball guy and the guy that's always been the head of the curve and kind of one step ahead. And it's not just that he was able to like see that James Harden was going to be an awesome player and trade for him before he was able to break out. Like, yeah, he did that too. And, that is forward thinking, obviously. But what he was trying to build in Houston in terms of stylistically basketball, bringing in D'Antoni, the way he built that team around Harden was, not ushered in the modern era, but definitely a model that opened up a way of, with Steph as well, too, showing, just how efficient players can potentially be and how effective, Steph is kind of like the example almost, is he, of like what Morey was trying to, like what Morey's math was trying to represent. I just got math stuck in my head because I watched that Terrence Howard Rogan reappearance again. But, whatever Morey's math was trying to display, like Steph was like the guy that's like, oh yeah, if you get a guy that is really good at it, like it can definitely take you to a title. 3-point shooting and all that all being centered around the stuff and the spacing and all that stuff definitely works. But, Morey was definitely on the forefront of thinking that way and building teams that way and getting guys and trying to get wings and all that stuff. But not that basketball has moved away from that. I mean, it absolutely is not. Like basketball, I mean, if anything, it's definitely gone more in. Like basketball is more probably that 3-point heavy type 3-point layup. No mid-range basketball is more prevalent now than maybe ever before. There is some mid-range type stuff that I think we might start trickling back in a little bit, but that's a different type of thing. But not that has changed, but with the new CBA, like we talk, we keep bringing this up, but with the new CBA, the way you build a team, like how is that going to change? What is ultimately the most effective way, financially to construct a team under the CBA? And what is the best way, and best types of ways to collect assets when you are working with this type of financial restrictions? Like, is it going to be signing these big money free agents and collecting these big money free agents like that? Because that has been the thing that Morey has always, again, with the 3-point shooting, always been the focus of building his teams is, we're going to the spacing and all that stuff, but we're just going to, we're going to spend and we're going to have really, if it means we're going to have 2 really good players and we're going to spend a lot of money for those 2 really good players, we're going to have those 2 really good players. We're going to try to get as many of those, super expensive players as we possibly can. And, a lot of times it was 2, or maybe it was more of like a 2-player model with Morey in Houston, because it was Westbrook, Harden, Westbrook, Chris Paul, Westbrook, Dwight Howard. But he's like really fully committing for it with this Paul George signing now in Philly. And he's getting away a little bit with it because the maxi number is potentially going to be still like a major discount for what type of player he's going to be. Like maxi definitely could be, a third, maybe second team. Like who knows? But he definitely could be he is an all NBA level talent guy, but he definitely could be a guy that is like physically on the all NBA list. So, he's at $40 million a year right now, and Paul George is at $52 million a year. I would bet that Maxey has a better chance of making all NBA than Paul George does. And that's not even a positional thing or whatever. That's just, I would just, I guess I'll just, Paul, I would say that Maxey's just the better. I would rank him. Would I rank Maxey I was going to say that confidently, but would I rank Maxey a higher player than Paul George? That's a tough one. I'd really have to think about that. And maybe we'll do maybe we're workshopping a bit about that for the summer with Sam coming up here. But, I guess you could definitely make the case that Maxey is the second best player on this team behind Embiid. And he's $12 million a year less than Paul George. So, you could still say that the number that he's making, Anunoby's at $42 million a year as well, which, different skill set, different type of value, where I don't know if Anunoby's value is too much less than Maxey's. But, again, Maxey's like all NBA level. I just really, really like Anunoby. His defense is really insane. But, Anunoby at $42 million or Maxey at $40 million, like me personally, I would probably just take Maxey at $40 million, especially with Aid as well, too. So, that's going to make, and that's the secret to this whole thing, and for them being able to have the financial space and the flexibility to be able to go out and get this other player. But, spending and committing this much cap on these 3 guys, not only are we seeing it be a struggle with these other teams, but, we're seeing Morey be like, I don't really care. I'll just go ahead and do it anyways. And, maybe it's with Maxey being, maybe he has potentially 3 all NBA level guys. And it just, in his mind, doesn't really matter. And they're just going to make it up for, in the playoffs, you're going to shorten your rotation. You're going to make it up with that top end talent anyways. But if the league is shifting in that new CBA, so right now, Philly is 3rd in active cap for the top 3 players. So, free agency is certainly not over. I guess maybe DeRozan really spikes in other teams cap number if they just need to like money launder a couple extra $20 million that we don't know about and really give them a pay raise. But I mean, you got Phoenix still just with the they're still $15 million ahead of the second place team. They've got an active top 3 cap of $150 million. I'm pretty sure the cap space is like 140. So I mean, they're screwed with just their top 3. Philly is second with 135.7. And then Minnesota is third with 135.2. I mean, they've overtaken Minnesota. Now, I don't know what that accounts for in terms of the Edwards contract. It looks like it accounts for, so that's got Edwards at 42 million. So Maxey at 40 million or Edwards at 42 million. If we're doing the Ellen DeGeneres Would You Rather, I think we might be doing another option. Moving on over to Anthony Edwards at 42 million. But Karl Towns, should I say only 49 million this next year? I mean, maybe not for Karl Towns, but still him not quite hitting that 50 million. Once he goes and hits the 5-0, then it's going to be really nervous for all the Timberwolves fans. But, you know, it's a weird, is it intersections? Crossroads is the word I was looking for. It's a weird crossroads with Daryl Morey where, again, maybe is this the time where the league was shifting and he didn't necessarily shift the right way? I don't want to call it too early because, again, Paul George, the team, that trio of guys, especially with, you know, we're super pro Tyrese Maxey on this pod. So we're definitely optimistic about what this Sixers core could be. And we're pro Embiid as well, too. And I'm pretty sure Sam's a pro Paul George type player. I don't know if Paul George is our GOAT necessarily, but we're definitely pro Paul George on this podcast. And, you know, they were able to bring back Kelly Oubre, the Jared McCain draft pick. Me and Sam both really like that pick. So I like some of the other guys in their team, but, you know, it's not going to be a super deep team. And once you get past Oubre, I guess we can just pull up the roster here. You know, the Melton loss is going to hurt. They were able to bring in Drummond, which, you know, is good depth around Embiid for sure. But ideally, Drummond is not out there in the final minutes of a playoff series, which not everybody you need to bring into your roster needs to be able to do that, which I believe is also why they're looking to shop Paul Reed as well, too, which is just, this would be another, it's just side tangent. If Morey is actually signing, which he is, he signed Drummond, and then if he is now looking to trade Paul Reed because he is signing Andre Drummond, then why are we signing Andre Drummond? Just go ahead and keep Paul Reed. I think Paul Reed's a better player. And he's younger too. He's 25, not that much more expensive. You know, technically, not technically twice as much. Drummond's almost at 5 with 4.8. Paul Reed's at $7.7 million this year. And they're trying to trade him for a forward, you know, a wingish type player as well too. So maybe they think that they couldn't get a forward at Paul Reed's skill level versus, you know, at Drummond's talent. Maybe they think the talent, you know, maybe there's a cost thing with Reed where they can get a higher upside guy at a different position and they just want to try to maximize that. But I would have, if I had to choose between the two, we're also, should we clarify if we haven't made it clear yet, very pro Paul Reed on this pod. It's election year this year, so we're going to take a lot of pro and anti-player stances. Right? Well, maybe we're not going to come out hard. Pause. Anti any of the players, but we'll definitely support who we're very pro for. We're pro Paul Reed on this podcast as well. But the Eric Gordon signing, sneaky good move. Obviously, I think the story of Eric Gordon's career lately is just being a sneaky good move, which is another thing with this free agency market. Like, I don't know if I understand the difference between like anybody between $11 million and $2 million is, maybe 11 million is a little aggressive, but like Chris Paul got 11 million from the Spurs. Yeah, Chris Paul is still definitely a better player than Eric Gordon. I think that's Chris Paul. Don't hate me. I know you just got to the Spurs and I didn't mean to start doing that, but I'm a fan. I'm all in. Trust me. I love the signing. I'm just, you know, like Oubre is at almost $8 million a year. And is Oubre, you know, 4 times better Then Eric Gordon, probably not. But with the way, I mean, you gotta pay a couple of guys with the cap, and then it's the salary for your draft pick, and then if you're not signing the extensions off of that, at this point, with the way the CBA is constructed, you're going to be at like an exception or basically a minimum level contract at this point. So, thinking it out, talking it out now, the league, it's very competitive in terms of a payment standpoint now, because the you're not just like getting the team with cap space just signing the guy for like 12 million or whatever type money. I mean, it seems like every time now it's the exception or the minimum contract for Gordon, who's at $2.087 million this year. And if you're Eric Gordon, again, it's a great move going to Philly. You're going to have a lot of fun there, hopefully. Maybe not all the time with the Philly fans being so aggressive, but play next to Maxey, Jared McCain. You're going to be in a couple of TikToks, the youth. It'll be good for you, I think, to be around the kids. But if you're going to go to these teams and just be signing these minimum level contracts and obviously be trying to win a title at the end of your career, why are we going to like these teams that are just a little, and maybe you're like, hey, I want to be that missing piece. Obviously, I get to get that competitive edge as much as the next guy. But again, if you're just going to be like, well, I'm going to take a minimum contract from anybody, Eric Gordon, just go to the Celtics, go to the Nuggets. Why wouldn't you just go play with Jokic? What are we doing? I think if you actually want to win the title, like let's actually go win the title. No, that's I know that just turned into bulletin board material for the Sixers fans. We're just talking here, having a good time. Again, we're pro Maxey. I like the upside for this team. Don't get upset too much, but just if we're really ring chasing, do we have to like really step up the ring chasing a little bit? I mean, you're not doing the Durant where, that's no disrespect in terms of the all NBAs. I'm just saying in terms of the money, Durant was also still, he went to the Warriors. He was still expensive. The reason they were just able to do it is because of the cap. And it was this phenomenon that they were able to afford this expensive guy while still also having these other guys on the roster. And it was also a phenomenon that Curry had the contract he had at that time because of the injuries to his ankle. I mean, it's similar to like a Maxey where, hey, he's so good in that rookie contract, that first extension is just not quite going to be up to par with like the experience and the accolades that he is playing to the level of. Just, the factor of things that makes you able to be able to pull all this stuff off. Pause. But, Morey's, again, really committing to just like, hey, the top end of the roster is really what matters. And if it's a couple of minimum guys and just rotation guys, we'll do our best to try to patch that together. And again, I'm not even saying that this is necessarily patchwork. It's just the league is so good right now. We're the team that just won the title. Again, Derek White, an all NBA level defender. And I guess I was going to say sneaky all-star might be a little aggressive for Derek White. But I mean, a guy that could definitely be like a 22, 23 point a game night on a team. Maybe, should I say, is Derek White a 23 point a night guy on a play-in team? Could he get it? Could Derek White get a team to the play-in game? I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that's the kind of guy right now that is, like Sam, pointed out last week, is the fifth man. And, he's like, oh, the 10th mans now are better than they were in the 90s. I get what he was saying. If you want to understand what he was saying, obviously go back and listen to the Friday episode where Sam said he was done with the 90s. But, again, Paul George, it's not with the market. It's I don't want to just say it's like the best the Sixers could do, because that sounds like it's a bad move. But it's like, yeah, it's the best player that they could get on the market. So you have to do that move. I guess I'm saying, like, regardless of the age and the injury history questions that you might have with George. And, again, bringing in a guy with some injury history next to Embiid, maybe not the most confident thing in the world. But in terms of fit and basketball and all that stuff, Embiid, George, and Maxey, that's going to be a really is that 8 to 10 fire emojis in the caption for that three. And then I don't know, can Paul Reed and Embiid play together in that lineup? No, I think George was the 4 in some of the lineups that I was seeing. And I guess Gordon was going to be either Gordon or McCain is just going to step in and be that starting two. I guess that's probably why Gordon went to the Sixers. That's why he went to Phoenix last year as well, because he thought he was like, well, they need me. I'm actually going to play. And Beal, Booker, Durant, just they were never able to, and, you know, I guess Eric Gordon, they were never able to get that balance right. But I guess he's got an opportunity here to be the starting two guard for this team. I mean, unless Ricky Council has like a super incredible camp that we just don't know about. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to zag and say that the Paul George move is anything other than, a really, really good move and just a good on the court move. And does it make them better than the Knicks? I feel like that's a question that Sam would ask if he was here. I would, in a series, honestly, they didn't go out and like solve the Embiid problem in the offseason. Now, maybe Anunoby and just the amount of effort that he's able to bring to that spot and what he gives you offensively, maybe bringing, making Embiid run around a little bit, just the effects of going small. Maybe that's able to counteract it. But Embiid was still so dominant against that team, and he wasn't even very healthy. So if Embiid is healthy next year, and if Embiid's like semi-healthy, and he's got a semi-healthy Paul George, and Maxi's even leveled up, I mean, that's that team that I just described is still better, I think, than the team that they put out this past year. Because, Batum played really solid minutes. They got a couple of the guys from the Harden trade. So, that really helped them get some extra depth going into the playoffs. Batum, Covington was able to provide some rotation for him as well. But it's not like pieces that you're necessarily crying over. Yeah, Melton as well, too. Like we mentioned, Lowry, I guess they're gonna have to try to replace Kyle Lowry. Oh, good luck doing that, Sixers fans. Like we said, they ran back Kelly Oubre Jr. Not like Kenyon Martin Jr. was a super big playoff rotation guy for him. So, I mean, it's still like, let's just say Embiid's still limping around in the playoffs next year and Paul George is limping around in the playoffs. That team is still better than this Sixers team. And that Sixers team took the Knicks to 7, also a hurt Knicks team, but a really good Knicks team took them to 7, could have beat them. And I think it's still going to be a tough out for anybody in the East. Obviously, Embiid driven if he's on the court, but the support of Paul George is definitely a big boost for the Sixers team. But also on the the Chris Paul signing as well, too, because of course we got to welcome Chris Paul to San Antonio. Very excited. Signed a 1-year deal for $11 million, which I don't know. I guess it's not like we need the commitment for 2 years from Chris Paul, but it would have been a little more like, I guess maybe it's more like he's moving into the next phase of his career where he's like, hey, am I just in full coach mode now? Versus now it still feels like, I don't want to, again, he's not ring chasing going to the Spurs, but he's kind of setting himself up. He's doing what he did, or what happened to him anyways, in Oklahoma City when he got traded to the Thunder, and then people were a little bit down on his stock, and he was able to revive that team and be a mentor to Shea and the young guys and get that team in the playoffs and help them overachieve. And that was able to help him become a much more attractive asset again. So maybe this is like his one last chance to do that, where, he gets to go to a team with a great culture and play with Pop and be a starting point guard and be still just a valuable part to a team. But also with Wemby, I mean, if he makes Wemby look good, and Wemby is going to make him look very good as well, too. Wemby's the ultimate guy for Chris Paul to just throw passes to. He's going to catch everything. He's going to dunk everything around the rim. Chris Paul's going to get him in every exact spot that Wembanyama want to work. I mean, as I'm talking about it right now, I'm like getting much, much more excited. Just even if it's just, backup point guard for Chris Paul, and there's 22 Chris Paul minutes. I mean, those are going to be incredible Chris Paul minutes. I mean, he's going to run the second unit with some veteran integrity. Maybe that's saying the same thing twice, but he's gonna run the second unit smoothly. And when he's playing with Wemby, he's gonna just have everything orchestrated perfectly for Wembanyama to be the centerpiece. And he's also, I think, gonna really help grow Stephen Castle, which, as I was preparing for the draft, one, I was preparing for the Spurs to take Devin Carter at 8 because of the rumors, but I was preparing for them to take another guard at 8 after drafting Castle at 4, with the theory being, hey, we're going to draft Castle, and yeah, he's a guy who's had guard experience and can handle and potentially be, point guard and playmaker-ish and do all these playmaker things, but he's going to be like a wing type guy. His defense, and if he develops, the shooting, and that's what's going to be the important thing for him. And this other guard is actually going to be a little bit more responsible for running the offense on, a day-to-day basis in the layman's terms. But now one, they traded their other guard. So now there's like actually a little bit more pressure on Castle to like be a dude from this draft where, they have 2 top 10 picks. It's like, can we just get some pieces? And nobody is really like a super huge fan of this draft anyway. So it's not like in general, I guess there's a ton of pressure from that narrative for him to become a dude, just because, again, there's not like people were viewing guys as dudes in this draft with no disrespect, but it's like, okay, we have a chance at a couple of pieces, and we're gonna. It feels like the pressure is a little more on the whole roster at that point, where it's like now Castle is the one big centerpiece from the draft, and he's a little bit more of a building block going forward. I mean, we're not going to see the benefits of that 28 pick until Castle is. I mean, is Castle's going to be like? We're going to be thinking about the second extension at that point for Castle, because Castle's going to be past his rookie contract and then 2 years in that first extension, and then you're like extension eligible at that point. So we're going to be in storylines about Steven Castle getting like his veteran contract extension before we ever see whatever they got for that Dillingham pick. But we kind of we needed him to become a dude anyways, but now we like really need him to become a dude. And Chris Paul, and we also need him, I should say, we need him to become a little bit more of like a point guard as well too, which is more important. So Chris Paul can definitely help Castle develop those skills, while Castle gives you all the wing skills that he was, hopefully promised to us in the first place. And Chris Paul's also just going to be beneficial running the team himself and being a valuable point guard to the roster. Just a culture guy as well. Everywhere Chris Paul has gone, I guess up until this Warriors team last year, they have overachieved. Was Draymond's antics the only thing that could neutralize Chris Paul's positive impact? Draymond's antics and Chris Paul's hamstrings have been the only 2 things, unfortunately, for Chris Paul's career that have been the things slowing him down. But very, very excited to have Chris Paul, even if it, at this point looks like it's only for 1 season. I can tell it's going to be a great one season stand with our guy Chris Paul. We got is it a pill? A point guard idea? I don't think we need to describe the whole thing. IT will workshop the metaphor, but it's going to be a great season, I think, with Chris Paul. Like we said, we were a little confused about the Dillingham move initially. I know, like Sam explained, getting picks and future assets and making the trade is going to be what is maybe important in that move, which I definitely understand. But still, for the couple of minutes that we had Dillingham, I really talked myself into it. But the Harrison Ingram pick, amazing. And the Chris Paul signing, really loved it. So Brian Wright, I'm back in. I was never out, but I guess I was like, I wasn't out, but I was out of the room, and I'm back in the room at this point, and me and Brian Wright are hanging out again. But speaking of whatever that trade would be for the Spurs, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Brian Windhorst had an interesting tweet about Darius Garland where he said there was really no market for Garland. So I don't really know what was going on with what is going on with these other teams where there's no market for Darius Garland. I guess I don't know if there's like a medical thing with him that I'm just unaware of, or I guess you never know the worst, but maybe it's just the amount of picks that teams feel they have to give up now. Maybe after the Bridges trade, teams like, okay, maybe we actually need a reset on what the trade market is for these picks. And maybe they just feel like it's just too much future assets to give up, even for a guy as good as Garland, which I would definitely not give up the Bridges package for Garland. But that's the thing, is like, Bridges didn't even make an all-star team, which for how good Bridges is, that just, point can be brought up in other negotiations with other teams where they're like, hey, you don't necessarily need if now the market for trading for non-all-star players is like 6 first-round picks and Darius Garland has 2 all-stars on his resume, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it's 1, but I believe he has 2, then maybe the price for guys, maybe NBA inflation is just a little bit too much. Because again, like we were saying, even with the Gobert trade, like that's 3 defensive player of the year trophies. So at least like there's something there that's gonna at least make you negotiate up a little bit the price. But in terms of hardware, if that's the line for now a guy with no hardware, maybe it's just a little bit too much. But we will continue to monitor how free agency will play out. Again, Paul George off the board, LeBron pretty much off the board at this point. We don't know what the number is going to be because DeRozan still on the board, may potentially end up off the board if he goes to the Lakers. And then LeBron as well, too, at that point would officially go off the board. But, we also had a couple of extensions, like the Siakam extension. I mean, Maxey wasn't going anywhere. Quickly re-upped really quickly. The Raptors, did they just weirdly get really expensive for Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickly and whatever else? Hey, fun young team. We love Scotty Barnes, face of the league. I guess $225 million for the face of the league is probably a bargain at the end of the day. But they, their guys, the Raptors guys definitely ended up getting the bag. So again, we will continue to monitor how free agency plays out. But one other thing that did happen this weekend that was obviously super fun to watch was UFC 303, which we were looking forward to because of Conor McGregor, the return versus Michael Chandler. He was going to make his appearance back in the ring since that fight with Poirier, where he broke his leg, which was that like, it wasn't 2019 at that point. That fight was in the 2020s for sure. But regardless, I want to say like 3 years ago for that fight. But it's been long enough. And, looking at the toe, Connor, maybe you should have been out there for UFC 303. But, he wants to be in perfect condition and at his peak self. Especially, I get it. You're not going to be, in theory, at your sharpest just after having a layoff that long. So maybe every little type of advantage is going to be extra important as well, too. And, we're pro McGregor. Take your time, buddy. Like, we get that. We want you to be in the best shape possible as well, too, for the fight. And we want to see, we'll always pull for McGregor when he's out there. But that fight versus Poirier would have been, 2021. So July 10th, 2021. So next week, it'll be 3 full years since Conor McGregor has officially stepped into the octagon. And we're going to have to wait a little bit longer, but fortunately, we got great MMA action between Pereira and Prohaska. The Yuri Hotan rematch, part 2, for the light heavyweight belt. And I'm even trying to remember what the rest of the card was at that point, because Brian Ortega as well, too, was supposed to fight on the card, and he ended up getting like an illness or something and ended up dropping out and was not able to be there. But I was not really locked in for the majority of the card, but did unfortunately was able to lock in for the main event. And, going back and watching the first fight after this as well, too, after this last fight where Pereira pretty easily takes down Prohaska in, I believe it was the first round as well, too. I can go back and double check, but I think I remember, in the Midwest, the pay-per-views can get pushed into the evening. And I know sometimes it's a Saturday, but, not every Saturday is the same. So some Saturdays you're laying there and you're like, hey, if this UFC fight was maybe 1 or 2 rounds, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And maybe not for the main event. It's like, hey, can we speed up a couple of these prelims? Give ourselves time for that main event. That's right. It was like literally right away to start the second round because Pereira got Prohaska at the bell, knocked him down to end the first round. Probably would have knocked, just gone in hammer fist and finished him off right there if that would have been just during the round. And then immediately second round, head kick, down he goes, bang bang. If it was Leon Edwards, and then looking at the rest of the card, I forgot I did watch the the Anthony Smith fight as well too, which was not surprising that I forgot that after after that fight because it was not the I would say not a ton of highlights from that fight, but Michael Page was on this card as well too. Definitely Michael Bennett Page. Huh. Might have to go back and rewatch this. I definitely tuned in for the Anthony Smith fight. How did they put Anthony Smith on the card before Michael Bennett Page? Very confusing. Not any names that I am personally familiar with in the prelims. There's another Oliveira related to Charles Oliveira, Bronx. And there's a Cub Swanson as well, too. No relation to Caleb Swanson. Rest in peace, buddy. But and unfortunately, our guy Cub Swanson didn't get the win. But Pereira now is. I was looking at the UFC pound for pound rankings, and I believe they have him fourth, which, I mean, Islam 1, John Jones 2. Leon versus Pereira, I think Leon, if you were just doing like the UFC video game sliders on his skill set, maybe has a more balanced / broader skill set. But Pereira is not just his domination at his levels, but the fear factor just with his, just how good he is at the skills that he has. It's just, he might have to be number 3 on this list. And just, to me, John Jones is the best fighter of all time, but he's also, hurt. He's not fighting. I'm not saying he's the number 3 pound for pound fighter right now, but just because of Pereira's activity, he might have to be number 2. And if you made the case for him number 1, I don't know if I could necessarily disagree with you at this point that Pereira is not the best pound for pound fighter on the planet. Now, Islam, the wrestling striking combo might be a little higher. He might have a little bit better balance. Maybe it's a little more well-rounded game. I get from a pound for pound standpoint, that might give him the edge. But again, Pereira's power and the leg kick strategy to start, because that's the thing that going back and watching the first fight where Prohaska was like a warrior in that fight, because Pereira leg kicks him. He hits him with the leg kick with like 3:50 left in the first round, like a minute 10 into the fight. And you can just tell right away, you're like, Yuri's crippled. He can't walk for the rest of this fight. I don't know how long it's going to go for, but he can't walk for the rest of this fight. And even when Pereira knocked him out the first time in the first fight, Prohaska, really did he was like still trying to get up at the end, and he just has always been a warrior. But, he's also, I'm not the fighting technique. I'm not gonna sit here and be Terrence Howard and teach the fighters and try to talk fighting technician. I'm not gonna try to mess up the fighting community. But I did see a post that said that Pereira saw a clip of Yuri pre-fight and Yuri's hands were down. And he knew at that point that he could go for the head kick because, Yuri bouncing around, warming up, like his hands are down. And, he was kind of loose like that in the first fight and just a little loose like that in the second fight as well, too. And Pereira is so powerful and he's so quick. And that's the thing. And he's just a little extra quicker, maybe a lot extra quicker as well, for like real fighting experts. But he's enough extra quicker where I feel fighters, even a guy like Yuri, as good as he is, he's just not going to. He's not gonna. He's not gonna see that coming in time. Pause for when Pereira throws that hook, because again, if you're all of these fighters, like I guess not all these fighters, but Yuri specifically was trying to fight very offensive versus Pereira. And he just, I don't know if he couldn't do that or just in general, you can't do that. But for him, it just didn't seem like the right strategy where Pereira, if he gets one even just little finger on you, he's almost got the one finger punch move with just how much power he has. It's incredible how perfect and how locked in your defense has to be versus him. And just Yuri stylistically, it doesn't seem like it's that way. Like Adesanya has been one of the things that I thought about a lot just in Pereira's recent run that he's had and just his rise in domination here in the UFC because, for what Adesanya is the one guy to beat him in this run. And he beat him very similarly to a way that he got him in round one. He's been probably the best competitor for Pereira, and Pereira, likewise the best competitor for Adesanya as well too. But I remember initially when Adesanya went down to Pereira, I don't want to say I lowered him or dropped him down from a all-time ranking, in my limited knowledge of in my mind, the fighters that I knew. But, Pereira was so new to the UFC, and me as just a UFC guy, I don't know these guys outside of the UFC. I'm starting to know a little bit more names at this point, but even still, I'm still pretty just much watching, only UFC for the MMA stuff, but just so new to the UFC. And Adesanya as well too had a history of losing. I think they had split a little bit in the fights before the UFC, but having had the belt for so long and just being such a fan favorite, and for us as fans of him, wanting to see him continue to have that reign, and just for this guy to show right up and take it right away, it's what is going on, Izzy? But now it's okay, it makes total sense. And now I've almost circled fully back around on Adesanya, where I have way much more respect for what he was able to do to Pereira. And the fact that he was able to beat Pereira, to me now is even more impressive, where it's I don't necessarily hold that loss as much against him as I should, as Pereira's resume. And that makes sense too, as Pereira's resume continues to grow here. But they were also saying after the fight, Rogan was asking him about he might potentially want to move to heavyweight, which is not necessarily something that I had thought of for him. I'm not saying I didn't think he couldn't do it, but, looking at the light heavyweight division now, he's beat Prohaska twice. He beat Hill pretty easily. And he also beat Blachowicz, which that fight went to decision. And maybe shout out to Blachowicz for going the distance with our guy Poatan. But, that's three of the top four guys. And, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but Anakolov. And I remember he fought Blachowicz, and they had I believe, if I remember correctly, they had a really, intense battle that ended up ending in a draw. And I don't remember if that was for an interim belt or for the actual belt itself. I believe it might have been an interim belt. But maybe you give him a shot. I guess I don't know where he's at with health and his career and all this stuff. He's currently ready to go and strapped up for a fight. But maybe he's the one guy in the top if Pereira stays in that division. But again, there's just really nobody. He's done it once again. There's nobody really left in the division for him to compete against. So if he were to move up to heavyweight, I mean, the hypothetical matchup at this point just becomes super fun. He could challenge Aspinall, interim belt. Aspinall has a fight on the horizon against Curtis Blades as well too. So I guess I'm just thinking, Blades. I guess, he could challenge whoever is the winner. He could just go ahead and challenge. Let's just say Blades wins that fight. He could challenge Blades. He could challenge Aspinall. If Aspinall wins, maybe he doesn't go for a belt right away. If it's a Ciryl Gane fight, that could be kind of fun. I believe did he fight Jailton Almeida? Yeah, was he in light heavyweight? I don't remember exactly. Name sounds familiar for the light heavyweight division. I mean, obviously we know Almeida, but maybe he's a 7th contender right now, so maybe he's a little bit down the list. But, just in terms of hype and all-time in matchups and just, potentially what could the UFC do? What is the most interesting Alex Pereira matchup available right now, I think he's just got to go for the top. And I think he's got to fight the number one guy. And if he wants to go to heavyweight, I think he's got to fight Jon Jones. I know Stipe Jon Jones is the fight that's been scheduled. I don't know what's been done in terms of paperwork. I don't know if they faxed that over and if that's been official at this point, or if that's just like a handshake agreement. But they had venues and all that stuff. So like that fight was locked in and ready to go. So I imagine that fight was pretty official. But again, we've thrown out a lot of all due respect this episode. But with all due respect to our guy Stipe, he's not going to be favored in that fight from an odds perspective. And from a public perspective, I don't know if guys are necessarily going to take him as the underdog either. And he's older. Like Stipe's a legend. Stipe's a legend. And him potentially beating Jon Jones, one, it's like, okay, he's confirmed now, greatest heavyweight in UFC history of all time. It's not even a question. It's Stipe. He just beat Jon Jones. And now it's like, oh, what are we talking about Stipe as maybe the greatest UFC fighter now of all times? And it's not only did he beat Jon Jones, he beat Jon Jones in his 40s. I get giving Stipe that opportunity as a legend is, maybe you owe him that. And he's absolutely earned it. I'm not saying he's not. But I personally think Jon Jones kind of beats him in that fight. And I don't want to say pretty easily because Stipe is a legend. But I think Jon Jones takes him. I would rather see Pereira fight Jon Jones than Stipe fight Jon Jones. And I don't know if you can just pair up the paperwork and pretend it never happened. And, that's now and maybe I shouldn't even say that as well, too, because, that's a payday for Stipe. I'm not trying to take away guys' money or anything like that. I'm just talking hypothetical fights, hypothetical matchups. What fighters do I want to see hypothetically fight each other? I'm more interested in the hypothetical Jon Jones versus Pereira than I am versus the hypothetical Jon Jones versus Stipe. Maybe it's Jon Jones after Stipe. Maybe I shouldn't even say like, hey, cancel the Stipe fight, whatever. I just am also saying that under the impression that Jon Jones has said that Stipe would probably be his last fight in the UFC. Maybe he would leave it open to like an Ngannou type fight just because of Ngannou's status. But outside of that, I don't know if there's much else he could do. But maybe Jon Jones in general would just be more open to continue to fight if Pereira is standing there as a potential option for him, because that now becomes as an all-time, that's like an all-time fight. And again, if we're talking, let's say after the Stipe fight, Stipe gets his bag, maybe Jon Jones gets his belt. But if that is from an all-time standpoint, the Khabib McGregor fight was pretty big. But at that point, Khabib was established. McGregor's a couple weight classes up. Khabib was the favorite. I don't know. And, the wrestling disparity between Khabib and McGregor was just too much at that point. And maybe that's what it becomes with Pereira and Jon Jones. Like Jon Jones, such a good wrestler. And again, I was going back and watching Jon Jones highlights, and I've always kind of debated in my mind who the greatest is between, wrestler between, I guess, ground game. I don't know what the best way to put it, because it's not, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, they're all separate things, but just the best on the mat between him and Khabib. And you just watch Jon Jones, just like the ease and the smoothness at which he's able to get, I don't know the proper terms, like the underhooks, and just when he goes in for a choke and just gets his arm under the neck, and just how smoothly and how seamless, it's just so easy for him. It doesn't even seem like the person is trying at that point. And a lot of times too, it's because he just has the person so worn down. He's a big, strong dude. He knows how to use his weight, put his weight on you. Stephen A. loves using that point when he's talking about fighters, but he really does know he knows how to get you tired, and he can just, the way he's able to gain position is just, he does it. To me, it's the easiest I've ever seen in the 45 UFC fighters that I've ever watched. But Pereira's power, and that's what makes the Jon Jones and Ngannou fight potentially so interesting. It's like all Ngannou has to do is touch him, and Jon Jones is down. Like, that is very possible. So one little stake, like the amount of stand-up defense you have to have is so perfect. But that fight would be absolutely insane. And Jon Jones as well, too, was also, famously for his whole career, a light heavyweight. And I think light heavyweight is probably Pereira's natural weight, even though I don't know. He's like definitely a smaller heavyweight, but maybe not. Maybe if he really bulks up, he's just a normal heavyweight. Maybe that's his normal position after all. But both those guys can comfortably, or at least both those guys can manage to get to light heavyweight. They can both get to heavyweight as well too. So there's multiple choices for those guys to be able to pull that hypothetical fight off. And I just think the clash of styles with Jon Jones's ground game domination and Pereira's stand-up domination would just be an incredible what if. And right now, to me, that's not only like, I'm not, number one, like historical would you rather matchup. Like that's a matchup that could actually happen, especially if Pereira is like, hey, I'm actually going to be moving to heavyweight here soon. And that's a move that I want to see. Now, like Pereira versus Gane, that's also just obviously not from an all-time standpoint, but just to see him get his feet wet in the heavyweight division, that would be a fun fight. And I'm not saying by any means that Gane is a get your feet wet fight. Gane is an interim champion in the heavyweight division, but I mean, no disrespect, but he's not Jon Jones. I mean, like we were saying, nobody is. He's the greatest of all time, but he's, strong puncher, maybe not the most technically, maybe not the most like all-round fighter as well too. So that's definitely like a stand-up match. Pereira is maybe not having to worry about that wrestling element. So you just get to see two guys kind of boxing at each other at the heavyweight division. That's a fun hypothetical matchup. Again, Jailton could be a fun matchup as well too. But Jon Jones, Pereira absolutely has to fight Jon Jones at some point. It has to happen. The UFC has to make it happen. Jon Jones, you got to beat Stipe. Get Stipe paid. Make no mistake. Make the man some money. But, like I said, we're pro Jon Jones. And it's just, we want to see him keep going. We're rooting for the Jon Jones story to keep going. And Stipe as well. I don't think Stipe is going to continue fighting. So I think Stipe going the distance with Jon Jones, hey, if it's a split decision and it ends up like that, hey, I'm not even going to be mad. Let Stipe let one of the judges vote for Stipe. That's totally fine. But after that, Jon Jones, Alex Pereira, Potan. Let's make it happen. Now, also, UFC, now this was just UFC 303 that just happened. UFC 305 in August, Adesanya back on the card versus Duplessis at the middleweight division. So with Adesanya deciding to step back in the octagon, now Adesanya versus Strickland, he's going to have to definitely lock back in, take it serious, and hey, let's go. We're in the octagon here. Again, I don't want to turn into Terrence Howard. I'm just talking. But, now that Adesanya is back, maybe that is the other what if that I would want to see. I'm not saying I would want to see it more than Jon Jones, but that's the other one I would be as okay with if it got announced. I'd be equally as excited on the announcement of that day if they broke the news for that fight. But the Pereira thing continues to happen. He is, again, just the ease at which he took down Prohaska this time. And the rematch is always interesting because it's like a game too. It's like, hey, we know your opponent. We know it's let's see what the counters are. Let's see what you're doing to mix things up. Let's see how, as a fighter, you're not just like evolving your game, but how good is your game plan? And, also just how elite are your skills as well too. And both of those things for Pereira are just super on point. I also was going back and watching the Hill fight as well too. And I mean, you forget in that fight that right before he knocks Hill out, like Hill kind of hits him low, right under the midsection. And he goes, it looks like it's going to stop Pereira for a second, but he kind of collects himself. I didn't go slow-mo down to see exactly where the foot landed. It could have been lower abdomen, and maybe Pereira's like, oh, okay, I'm okay. But the ref goes into official timeout, and Pereira waves the ref off. Because at this point, Pereira has really, you can tell, he started to set Hill up. He's taken like some lower body shots, which, I mean, Pereira's not going to, he's not Thor. I mean, the man will go for the head. and he will not miss. But he was loosening him up for some body shots, and you could, I mean, you could just tell he had him in kind of in the setup where he wanted him, and the ref was going to come in and time out and break him up and throw everything off, and Pereira waves him off, and just immediately, like 1-2 steps, gets the punch that he wants. Hill goes down, the fight's over. And just a lot of fighters in that moment, even if they were setting him up, I feel like a lot of fighters just take the timeout. And, again, you get kick low like that, like you deserve the timeout. That's why the rule is in there. But it's also, hey, maybe I can recollect and get a breath here. It's stamina, it's a title fight. We're going 5 rounds. I might as well take the free timeout. Like, there's nothing against that either. Using all the tools in your toolbox, the legal tools, is, to me, totally fine if you're a fighter. So the ref's going to give you a little official timeout and you want to take 10 seconds, I guess, don't bore the crowd. But if you need to catch your breath, that's totally fine. But to just be like, hey, I'm in my setup where I want, and I know, and that confidence as well too, to just be like, yeah, I got him, he's done, and I'm just gonna get him right here. Is he continues to me, and the all-time stuff is weird as well too, because just the length of the resume at this point is not that long, but it's a little Mahomes-ish. Not that he's doing it at a younger age, where he's had a professional fighting career outside of the UFC, where he's been very highly decorated before, the Adesanya sagas and all that stuff. But the shortness of the run definitely helps in some way, for sure. It's like, oh, it's incredible that he's been able to pull this off in this few of fights. But, on the other end, other fighters that had just long sustained runs of dominance and constant title defenses and all this stuff is also like, hey, yeah, these guys are also in the mix for Gracie Ball. I mean, GSP, it's like his run versus a guy like Pereira, who did it maybe, it's just stacking all these title defenses together. And he's only had like 11 UFC fights, and he's 2-time division champ. I mean, let's say he goes to heavyweight fight and 2 fights and he wins a heavyweight belt. Maybe John Jones wins a belt against Stipe, vacates the belt. Pereira fights against, Gon or somebody like that in an eliminator. And then, he's fighting Aspinall or whoever for the actual vacated belt at that point. Maybe he might get 3 belts in 13 UFC fights. And then at that point, it's like, okay, he's probably like top 5 UFC fighter of all time, especially the 3-belt thing. Nobody's ever done that before. But at this point, 2 belts. I mean, again, John Jones, Khabib, GSP, we can, all the top names, but that level of star that like we just had in the UFC. I mean, the guy that he just went head to head with, Adesanya, Usman, Ngannou. Ngannou didn't have the amount of title fences as like Adesanya and Usman, but definitely rose to prominence. Those guys were stars. That was definitely the era of the UFC, was that era. And he's, I don't know, kind of, at least in a fear factor, to me, he's more terrifying than just about any of those guys. I mean, Usman, such a good wrestler as well, too. And the knockout that he has against Masvidal, like, to also be a wrestler with that kind of power, I don't want to say he's not like more powerful than John Jones, but the power for a wrestler, I don't know if he's capable of generating. I'm turning into Terrence Howard of UFC over here, but that's why we saved it for the end, because as we continue to watch these fights, we continue to learn, and we continue to learn that you don't want to mess with our guy, Alex Pereira. So shout out to him. We'll hope to see him soon. We can't wait for this UFC in the Sphere either, because after watching that hockey game in the Sphere, or the hockey draft in the Sphere, a UFC fight in the Sphere is going to be absolutely crazy. Now, if I remember correctly, and I don't want to get this wrong, but were they using the Sphere for, Mexican Independence Day? So there's obviously nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying maybe it means we don't get a guy like Pereira on the card, who's a Brazilian superstar. Mexican independence. maybe is Moreno going to be headlining the Sphere in Vegas? I imagine Grasso's on that card, right? I guess I don't know what her fight schedule is here on the horizon, but you got Mexican Independent. You got to put Grasso on that card. You got to put Moreno on that card. I don't, I feel like I'm lacking on world history here, but like, can you sneak a guy like Tapor on that card? France? Or not France, sorry, Spain. I don't know how well received. I feel like, Pereira might be Brazil versus Mexico. We're going to have to do our international relations studies, see if we can figure out which of these fighters are going to be on the UFC card in the Sphere on Mexican Independence Day. But before Mexican Independence Day, holy cow, we've got American Independence Day, baby, this weekend. It's 4th of July weekend on, I guess it's not weekend, it's on Thursday, but 4th of July week here on, I guess in America, not just on the Rem and Sam pod. But we will be back maybe this weekend again. 4th of July is this Thursday. So just, hey, we pride ourselves in full transparency on the Rem and Sam podcast. Full transparency. We don't know whether or not we'll be recording this 4th of July weekend. But hey, the only way to find out is just going to be to stay tuned to the feed. So at Rem and Sam podcast on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TikTok, Google Maps, whatever you want to search, whatever app you want to follow us on, we're probably on there at Rem and Sam or at Rem and Sam podcast. So again, for those of you guys that have already followed, thank you so much. And for the new guys, thank you as well too for finding us, for checking us out. And like we said, we don't know what the schedule is for this week, but we definitely know that next Tuesday and next, Friday and all that stuff, next week we will be back to usual. But I don't want to scare you away, but stay tuned to the feed and we'll see what happens this weekend. If not, stay safe, don't get hurt from the fireworks, and have a good night.